What's really going on with Halo Infinite? The Halo Infinite reveal is an ongoing story that changes by the day. I made a video a few days ago addressing my original reaction to the gameplay demo, and some speculation as well on what is really going on with the visual influence. I feel that I have to address some of the changing parts of the story. First of all, I feel that I have to address the rumor about the Halo Infinite multiplayer not coming at the launch of the game. So 343 have since confirmed that Halo Infinite multiplayer will launch with the game. There was a tweet by the community director Sketch, which confirms that it will launch with multiplayer, stating quite openly, "Nothing to see here, folks. This is not true." The Steam page also shows all of the features including Forge, although there is a note underneath saying more details at a later date, which I believe indicates that it's likely still subject to change. Microsoft are probably pushing for release alongside the Xbox Series X, and the game might still get delayed. 343 have been known to stagger releases of different content for a game, like with Halo 5 and Halo MCC. Another thing to note is that the Forge lead from Halo 5, as in the person who created the Halo 5 Forge, is in charge of the multiplayer for Infinite, the last I heard. What a lot of people have been saying is that this build is a work in progress. For example, there was a Digital Foundry video addressing a lot of the complaints around the Halo Infinite graphics. One of the key topics of it was the dynamic lighting. They talked about how Halo Infinite used real-time lighting as opposed to baked-in lighting, which is part of the texture, or static lighting, which they showed an example of in The Last of Us 2. Halo Infinite as a game was meant to be able to run on the original Xbox One model from back in 2013. It was pushed by Microsoft to be a launch title for the Series X. A lot of the gameplay for the Halo Infinite demo was set in valleys, which obviously means it's going to have soft lighting. This will obviously make the lighting seem less impressive, and you won't see the immediate effect of the lighting. The Digital Foundry video also focused heavily on the use of probe lighting to simulate indirect lighting, which isn't the same as simulating every light bounce. The implementation of the lighting is far from complete. Parts of the models that shouldn't be lit are being lit, and you can see examples of this at several points around the game. Graphical effects like screen space ambient occlusion, which obviously aren't implemented yet, often help with these visual issues. It often reduces the effect of probe lighting up parts of the model that shouldn't be lit. As they said that this is a work in progress, so obviously that wouldn't have an effect yet. Another thing they noted is that the effects look very opaque. They put this down to art style, which I agree with. Obviously, if you watch my last video, I said there was some influence from games such as Fortnite, which is driving the visual direction for the game. They also put a small side note at the end mentioning that Microsoft has announced a patch for ray tracing support, but however that patch is going to come after the game launches. Obviously, the patch coming after the game launches means that's not an integral part of the game, and likely the visual experience won't be designed around it. Several sources have already confirmed that the build is around 4 months old. This would explain a lot of the visual issues such as the aforementioned lighting issues, as well as things like the texture pop-in. There was an interview with the general marketing manager at 343, Aaron Greenberg. He stated that the demo build is definitely a work in progress. He even went so far as to say that the release version of the game will be what he called a visual showcase, meaning he's claiming that's going to have very impressive graphics. The most significant reason he gave for the visual appearance was, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, so obviously that's something you have to take into account. I still think that's a baffling decision, to be honest. Perhaps they could have done something like a shorter demo. Surely they would have been aware of the backlash they would have received for showing off this unfinished looking game. To an extent, you have to wonder whether it's even worth showing it. Although to counter that point, you have to remember that Halo fans were really waiting a long time for any sign of gameplay. Now that I thought about it, the unfinished state of this demo is probably why we haven't gotten gameplay for so long. They didn't reveal Halo Infinite gameplay for such a long time because they knew we wouldn't be impressed by it. Another thing you have to take note of, there are some details in the game that are easy to miss due to the unfinished nature of the lighting. A lot of the comparison screenshots that people have been posting online comparing Halo Infinite to previous Halo games like Halo 3 are slightly dishonest in some ways, I feel. Because Halo, I think as a series, has always had quite good lighting. If you look at Halo 3 for example, it was actually very sophisticated for 2007. You could see the light shafts and the god rays were very well placed. There was a lot of thought and detail that went into it. And obviously Halo 3 had the benefit of being a finished product. To the game's credit as well, some people have done photoshops where more detail is present, and I think they look significantly better. A lot of these photoshops that have been posted online are just minor adjustments, which being charitable to the game means that they can be fairly easily implemented. Another thing a lot of people online have noted is that the game could be aiming for 4K at 60 FPS. Obviously this is very demanding because it's a combination of high resolution and high frame rate. To have a game be this demanding, it goes without saying that the graphics should be toned down for the sake of performance. To have a combination of such a high resolution and a stable 60 FPS frame rate. Obviously, what a lot of people have been saying is that the demo was originally meant to be shown off at E3, so that also goes into the explanation that it's several months old. So I want to address another video by a YouTuber, ReviewTechUSA, who stated they have an inside source in the industry. Obviously I can't confirm this source myself, but I'll try and address, what the source has said in the video. The source stated that it was running on a Condor dev kit, which is essentially a mid-spec PC, so it wasn't even running on the Xbox Series X. This adds into the idea that it was originally meant to be shown off at E3 and that's an old demo. A lot of people say it's around 4 months old. It's all but confirmed at this point that it is from around January. To further expand upon that leak, apparently the game was originally going to be on Unreal Engine 4 and the player would be able to explore the whole Halo ring. It was obviously scaled down with the new engine, the Slipspace engine, and that's how we got the game we have now. I think this adds into my theory of the changing visions of how the game was supposed to be. Because obviously if the game was meant to be on Unreal Engine 4, but then at the last minute just changed, I think that definitely indicates that there's been some conflict of the vision. It's been muddied in some way. So in some way it may have given into market pressure. I also want to quickly highlight what a lot of people have pointed out on the internet. There was an employee spotlight for a member of the team working on the graphics who started in 2018. Who sounded quite proud of his work. He said there was a degree of detail and polish to the highest quality, and he aimed to achieve, quote, realistic characters and, quote, beautiful landscape. He sounded quite proud of it, as if it was like a finished product. Now, obviously, anyone describing their own job would have to kind of big it up a little, they'd have to act quite proud of it. You can't point out all the visual flaws that would occur in it. So to be honest, I don't think you can read too much from this, but it's still something to keep in mind. At least some people thought it looked complete, but I think they have to act that way either way. And even if they say that it looks like a complete product that they're happy with, they always have the thought at the back of their head that it's not complete. So obviously we can't speculate too much on what this employee actually thought of the work. Obviously there's a bit of hyperbole involved. 343 have addressed a few concerns with the gameplay as well. For example, the sprint and the grapple will work differently in multiplayer than it will to single player. There's been talk that the sprint and grapple are more akin to power-ups, like the overshield or the active camo. So I think that could be quite good, that could be interesting. Again, I think we'll just have to wait and see how it turns out. It's also been shown that the open world will not be Far Cry-esque and more like zones that unfold as you complete missions, which you can backtrack through, which is more comparable to, say, Metroid. I think this is a good thing, as I don't think Far Cry's gameplay really suits Halo. So taking all this new information into account, I want to speculate a bit. There's a term in the industry they refer to as development hell, which is where a project is in a state of limbo or uncertainty. I think this is congruent with my idea that there has been a change in vision somewhere along the line of the development of Halo Infinite. Of course, a big part of this is that publisher pressure is ever present. Halo is of course synonymous with the Xbox brand. Microsoft is going to have certain expectations about when their product is released. For example, Halo Infinite is what people call a flagship release. It's going to be one of the big titles that the Xbox Series X is going to report with, so obviously there's a lot of pressure riding on this game and the success of it. So I think the vision for Halo Infinite has been very susceptible to market pressure. The management 343 in some cases could almost be compared to like a revolving door, where the writers and all the creative staff come and go. I believe there has been a kind of change in vision, along the line of the Halo Infinite development. Halo 4 went through a similar process, with the creative director leaving about halfway through and the game having to undergo quite significant changes to what we got at launch. I think there's a lot of evidence that this game is in a kind of development hell, such as the change from Unreal to Slipspace engine, which is, if you don't know, the Slipspace engine, it's an engine that 343 built from the ground up to be used in studio. There is, of course, the changes in management that I mentioned in my previous video that should be taken into account. I believe that in light of the recent evidence, it's fairly safe to suggest that Halo Infinite that we got in that recent demo is not the same as the Halo Infinite we saw in 2018, and not the same as the Halo 6 or Halo Infinite that was being thought up after the release of Halo 5, starting probably as early as prior to the launch of Halo 5. People say that 5 years of development time is a lot to see what we actually ended up getting, but you have to realize that the current Halo Infinite we have now has not been in development for all that time. 343 has probably spent a lot of that time trying to decide on a vision, trying to decide on a team that they want to execute that vision. So that's why it may seem a bit muddled to some. After all, Halo 5's story had a fairly poor reception. They tried to keep some of the good ideas from Halo 5, like the Forge, by promoting the Forge lead to the lead of multiplayer, but for a lot of the ideas from Halo 5 they had to go back to the drawing board, and that's how we got Halo Infinite. Now, to be entirely honest, it sounds like I'm being very negative on the game, but to be completely frank, I do really hope that it's successful and that it's a good game, because after all, I mean, Halo 2 didn't exactly have a smooth development either. Well, anyway, besides all that, I have to thank you for watching, listening to my rant, listening to all this new information coming out and keeping up. Thank you all for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and hit the bell. Hit the bell.